evening, everybody. It's Mike with On Point Preparedness. Again, got another little unscheduled live stream for you all. Wanted to talk about, the boy that cried wolf, well, the story that we all know, and how it applies to this CV19 issue that we're seeing. And I wanted to also relate it back to the Spanish flu of 1918. A lot of people have been watching documentaries on the 1918 Spanish flu. And if you have, you probably already know where I'm going with this with regards to the communications of that time. History just repeats itself. So we're going to talk about a lot of different things here, but it will be relatively short. Maybe spend some time at the end with question and answer. But before we get into the whole Spanish flu of 1918, I did entitle this, what did I entitle this? CV19 Cries wolf. There's so much information coming out right now that there is just such a diverse number of opinions on this issue. There are folks that are saying this is typical media hype. Again, sort of that boy that cries wolf. The media has always been crying wolf, 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 wolf. And then if there's a wolf, well, then the populace is just saying this is typical media. They're just crying wolf. And there's a lot of people that just really don't care. Good example. Just went to Costco to start storing up on some things. Some people look like death. Everyone's still eating the samples. Everybody loves Costco samples. Still eating it up. I'm like, no, thank you. I'm going to stay away from the buffet. Another interesting thing, I don't have it pulled up right now, but there was actually a guy who was under quarantine and was out of the 14-day period, I think in Pennsylvania even, and he was cleared. And then Fox News was doing an interview of him, and he was coughing during the entire interview and sharing a water bottle with his 5-year-old daughter. And I'm just like, oi, just it's nuts seeing what's going on right now. But I mean, this is really the situation. Is just everyone has been so trained to think that the media is always hyping things up, and they do, to when there's an actual wolf. No one seems to care or pay attention. But for all of you who are sort of in this genre of truther movement, hopefully you've seen enough to date, at least with the citizen journalship that's occurring in Iran and South Korea, and what limited information can come out of China. You're starting to see that this is a wolf. This is a legitimate thing. And so that's just frustrating to me, just all the diverse opinions. Some people think that, again, this is all just media hype. There's a whole bunch of people that think that this is just all about politics. Again, there is indeed politics in here, and people are using the coronavirus to just play politics and make jabs against one another. That's definitely at play, but it still doesn't take away from the fact that there's really a wolf involved here. I talked about previously how there's some people saying that this is all because of 5G. As I mentioned 1 and 2 videos ago, that theory would start to deconstruct itself as we start to see this spread across the world. And in fact, we are seeing that theory deconstruct again. Anyone that thinks 5G can cause health effects, I agree. I don't think that there's been studies to prove that it's safe. But to say that it has so much of an influence to actually hit people dead in the streets and things like that, I'm not there yet. And in fact, 5G has been rolled out in a lot of places for years, and we haven't seen this type of thing happen. And again, you're starting to see this virus start to take footholds in places where there's no infrastructure for 5G, and people are still getting it. And so in order to try to maintain that 5G relationship, you have to jump through a lot of hoops, especially with where we're at right now. There's a lot of other theories as well. Obviously some people think it's bioweapons, some people think it's that, but there's just so much information that it's just getting a little bit crazy. And unfortunately, because of all the information, all the diverse amount of information that's out there, the White House has now taken a position where they are essentially going to censor the messaging on the virus. Let me go ahead and switch screens here for you guys in case you had not yet seen this information. First off, you see here, Facebook should come as no surprise. Facebook is going to prohibit deceptive or alarming ads about coronavirus. So already you see some censorship here. And then the bigger news was that Mike Pence, now I know they say he's not a czar, but now the czar or leader of this virus task force, he wants to sign off on all public messages. So they have to be cleared through him. And that's pretty interesting. Again, there's a lot of crazy news. Not all of it is true, but this is the wrong response. And if you had not yet seen the documentaries on the Spanish flu of 1918, the government did this exact, not just our government, world governments did this exact same thing with the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic. And so again, if you haven't seen this information, you're going to find this pretty interesting. I definitely did. Let me just share with you two news articles that I pulled up here. The first one is from the National Center of Biotechnology Information. So this is a very scholarly site for medical research, peer-reviewed journals. They talk about the threat of pandemic influenza and if we are ready. I think this was back sometime maybe in 2018. So it's not really written in response to the current events. But they take a recap of the history and events of 1918 so that we can learn. Particularly, take a look at this. Every country engaged in World War I tried to control public perception to avoid hurting morale, even in the non-lethal first wave. So this virus in 1918 actually had 3 waves over time. The press in countries fighting in the war did not mention the outbreak. But Spain was not at war, they were neutral, and the press wrote about it. So the pandemic became known as the Spanish flu. So it never really originated out of the Spanish flu. It actually originated out of the military. The military was the one that transferred this all over the world. The United States was no different. In 1917, California Senator Hiram Johnson made the since famous observation that the first casualty when war comes is truth. The U.S. government passed a law that made it punishable by 20 years in jail to utter, print, write, publish any disloyal, profane, scurrilous, or abusive language about the government of the United States. One could go to jail for cursing or criticizing the government even if what one said was true. A congressman was jailed. Simultaneously, the government mounted a massive propaganda effort. An architect of that effort said, "Truth and falsehood are arbitrary terms. There is nothing in experience to tell us that one is always preferable to the other. The force of an idea lies in its inspirational value. It matters very little if it's true or false." The combination of rigid control and disregard for truth had dangerous consequences. Focusing on the shortest term, local officials almost universally told half-truths or outright lies to avoid damaging morale and the war effort. They were assisted, not challenged, by the press. Go figure. Government's in bed with the press, and the press is in bed with the government, which, although not censored in a technical sense, cooperated fully with the government's propaganda machine. This is the United States, folks, and this is also other world countries. Routinely, as influenza approached a city or town, one could watch it march from the place to place. Local officials initially told the public not to worry, that public health officials would prevent the disease from striking them. And when influenza first appeared, officials routinely insisted at first that it was just ordinary influenza, not the Spanish flu. And as the epidemic exploded, officials almost daily assured the public that the worst was over. The pattern repeated itself again and again. And later on, I actually got another article here. I wanted to first reference a scientific article to show you that this is true factual history. But this other article puts it much more plainly. They also mention about the Sedition Act of 1918, which had the 20 years imprisonment if you went against the government propaganda. But take a look at this. I'll just blow it up a little bit more. So, considering all this, it is unsurprising that as Americans were dying by the thousands, public health officials continually lied about the scope and severity of what was going on. The media fell right in line. An October 15, 1918 headline in the Philadelphia Inquirer read, "Scientific Nursing Halting Epidemic." In that week alone, nearly 4,600 people in Philadelphia, which is where that newspaper was written out of, died of flu-related illnesses. On September 20th, the Arkansas Gazette wrote, "Spanish influenza is a plain la grippe, same old fever and chills." I got a little picture here that someone shared with me on my Facebook, and this was from a newspaper in 1918. "Spanish influenza, a new name for an old familiar disease." Just take a look at a lot of the words here. No occasion for panic. I'm not saying you panic, but I'm just showing you that history definitively repeats itself. They just start talking about how this is just like the cold. This is just like the flu. And what have we been hearing, especially in the presidential speech? That this is sniffles. That was actually a word that was used. This is the cold. This is the flu. It's nothing to worry about. Doesn't spread any worse than the flu. Doesn't have a mortality rate anywhere near the flu. They even mentioned the fact that, the flu kills much more people than the death toll that we have currently. This is all the same language, really, that's coming out. And as many of your truther YouTubers and bloggers are stating, if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, probably is one. And sure enough, and I've being a little bit redundant with this, you look at just all the nationwide school closings in China and Japan. South Korea is almost there. Italy has shut down schools. Iran and Guam has shut down schools. And I think they may even be getting to the fact where this is a unconfirmed report, but at least schools have been shut down in about 15 different cities Iran. It sounds like it's getting very much out of control there. Shutting down entire schools, shutting down borders, influencing the stock market to where I think it crashed like 12%. This is the worst crash since the 2008 crash. You don't just do those things based on a hunch or trying to protect the public. That's not really their goal. There's something serious going on. Israel was another one that took an extreme measure by notifying all their citizens that they recommend that they halt all traveling abroad. Again, you don't do those types of things for something that is sniffles, for something that is flu. In addition to that, again, it's complemented by the fact that we've got a lot of citizen journaling, some of which is fake, some of which is true, but a lot of citizen journaling which can be confirmed by multiple, iterations. Citizen journaling that is showing ground level that numbers are pretty much false. There's actually an article that I want to pull up where I thought it was sort of funny. It said that the U.S. is sending spies into India because they don't believe India's corona numbers. And I'm like, speak for yourself. People don't believe the numbers in the United States, although I told you why the numbers are low. People don't believe the numbers in Iran. People don't believe the numbers in China. There are some medical doctors out there on YouTube that do trust very much the numbers coming out of South Korea. Some other folks do as well. Me personally, I don't know the government well enough to say it's trustworthy or not. I do think the cases are definitely, it looks, if you see the logarithmic or the exponential trend that's going on in South Korea, it does seem fairly true. But again, we just really don't know. And based on the events of 1918, as you can see here, it's not out of the realm of possibility that world governments, in terms of protecting their own self-image and self-interest, would conceal the numbers. And so let me actually pull it up. Let me pull this up on Google and find this other result here. U.S. sends spies to India for this. Let me see if I can pull that up here. Yeah, here we go. This is New York Post. U.S. spy agencies monitoring the spread with focus on India. Spy agencies in the U.S. are monitoring the spread with a focus on India. India has confirmed 3 cases of COVID with, wow, the government says about 24,000 people are under observation. But basically, what I saw in this article is that they're really not trusting the numbers out of India. So I think all governments are really looking at one another, not really trusting the numbers, and I think it's fair that the populace does not trust any of the governments for the numbers, mostly because of history repeating itself. Other strange things that I've seen in the news, there's a lot of people in Africa that are saying that this is just a big social experiment, that this is depopulation, because I did not know about this. This was February 2nd, 2020. Ethiopia, the government there is not and has not stopped flights out of China. The most shocking thing about this, which I did not know, is the Ethiopians' government assertion that they are prepared to tackle coronavirus is on the heels of receiving 1,500 passengers a day into the country from China. And, you have a lot of comments from Bill Gates saying that he thinks that this region is the next big thing. And honestly, he's probably behind the whole thing, or at least has some part to do with it. But just crazy things going on. And again, the timing of this, as I mentioned, I do think that this is a bioweapon. I do think it was designed. I have a hard time believing that it transferred from animal to human and then human to human. And, it may have escaped from that lab, but that thing really just picked the best time to escape, during the Chinese Lunar New Year. I mean, that's just the perfect time. It's all just coincidence, right? I think that this was purposeful. I also think some of these things are purposeful. And it's really just a sign of the times. It's a sign of the end times, and we're all sort of alert to what is going on. But again, the main thing that I wanted to call your attention to, and if you do some searching on Google or on YouTube, there are some good documentaries about the Spanish flu of 1918, the pandemic of 1918. Really interesting for you to read up on that. Not saying that this virus is going to have the same profile or same characteristics of this event, but there could be similarities. Again, I think there's similarities in terms of the propaganda that is being spewed out. But in addition to that, some of the epidemiological characteristics might be the same. Again, in 1918, this virus actually had 3 waves, with the latter waves being the most powerful. And so that is on a lot of scientists' minds is it getting more virulent? Is it mutating at all? Some of the reports say it is mutating. Some say it's not. I have really no idea what to believe. All I'm really focused on is the United States and sort of what's going on here. Now, I did mention in my last video, right, why the numbers are low in the United States. And it's basically because of the very restrictive criteria on who qualifies to get a test. And you have to have clinical presentation of the symptoms, and you have to have traveled to China within the last 14 days, or you've been in contact with a COVID-19 confirmed laboratory case. That is highly restrictive. It doesn't give health practitioners the ability to have a suspected case and send a test into the CDC. And so you guys know why the numbers are low. In addition to that, the CDC screwed up some of the test kits and they're not validating properly. You've probably seen, now this is where you start to get into bureaucratics and Democrat, Republican type things. But California said they don't have enough test kits. Some other states are saying they don't have enough test kits. So between those two things, the restrictive guidelines on who can test, as well as the supply chain of test kits being hindered, we're having very low numbers. There was another country as well that had many thousand tests already run, and we're still under 1,000, I believe, maybe even under 600. So it's just absolutely appalling in terms of what's going on in the United States. But as I mentioned, that if you listened to the CDC conference and or you listened to the presidential debriefing, at least one reporter brought this up to both the CDC head and President Trump about, when are you going to change the criteria? This is obviously not just in China anymore. It's coming from other countries. We've seen reports of where, there was an airline attendant from South Korea to LAX. She had it. We're seeing intercommunity spread. When are you going to change the guidance? When are you going to change it to where anyone that has flu-like symptoms and is negative for flu can be tested according to the real-time PCR test. They haven't updated it. They basically said in both those situations, the presidential conference and the CDC conference, that it's on the table to modify those criteria, but at the moment they don't feel the need to. Well, of course, because you want to keep your numbers low. The CDC gave a little bit more detail in terms of assuring the public that even though the criteria isn't revised, they have everything under control. They mentioned that they are relying on secondary surveillance systems at the local community level. What exactly does that mean? I don't know 100%, but I can give you a partial answer. So, if you've seen state-to-state news, and some of this is going more national, you'll notice that there are many people that are under surveillance. So in Ohio, there was 212. I think in California, it might have been 8,000. So you're seeing like either thousands or hundreds that are under surveillance. And the definition of under surveillance, I find, has not been consistent from state to state. When I looked at my own state in Ohio, what it means under surveillance is it means that these are people that have had travel to a region with an outbreak but are currently not presenting symptoms. Okay, so they're giving us that number. They're also giving us the number of suspected people that have symptoms and have travel. But one of the numbers, at least for Ohio, that's missing is how many people that have pneumonia or flu-like symptoms and have tested negative for flu and are under observation. There is no number. And so I really wonder what that definition is. Under surveillance. Is it that they've traveled to a hot region and don't have symptoms and are under self-quarantine? Does it mean they have clinical presentation and a negative flu result? What does it mean? But that's what the CDC is saying that they're counting on. It was all, at the local level, there's all these surveillance things in place, and we're monitoring that, and that's why we're not changing their criteria on the actual diagnosis test. That is just shocking. It's appalling, actually. I don't know what the true motivations are for that. One could say that it's purposeful manipulation of the numbers. I think it is. In addition to that, one of the other hypotheses is that because they don't have many of these tests created, because of the issues with validation and whatever other reasons there are, they're trying to limit it as much as possible because they know they'll run out of tests and then they'll be just dead in the water, essentially. So I don't know what it is, but it definitely is modifying the numbers way lower than what they're supposed to be. So how do we handle it? Again, if you saw my last video, I did have a prayer for not being fearful, but definitely looking at this very prudently, very analytically, trying to prepare sensibly, not panicking or not giving yourself to be a slave to fear. And right now, really is the time to go and do so. We've seen some articles on Drudge where there is panic buying already occurring in Hawaii. I think they were rationing out toilet paper. Obviously, the masks are something that's hard to come by. That's a funny thing because that's another thing with just the proliferation of information that's going on right now. You have some people saying the mask is useless. It's really not helpful. Just wash your hands and practice good hygiene. But everyone in the hospitals is wearing masks in terms of the hospital care workers. As I showed you in a couple videos ago, when the outbreak started to happen in South Korea, the government was handing out masks. They had lines of thousands of people trying to get masks. So the government was handing out masks. All throughout China, you see them handing out masks. I would get yourself a mask. I really, have a hard time with the people that say you don't need a mask at all. Don't go ahead and get one. Especially, I was a little bit more animated in my last video when I talked about 5G. I was actually fairly angry with regards to a specific portion of people that believe there is no virus at all. They say there is no virus at all, and this is just 5G. What really makes me mad about that is that in China, there are healthcare workers, doctors and nurses that are coming down with this virus. And if you've seen the videos from Coriana Jones or other YouTube channels, there was one which stated that the doctors and nurses, because they're in protective apparel, and because, the virus is on your protective apparel, and every time you degown and regown, it's a risk of getting contaminated, they try to limit the number of times they gown and degown. So what does that mean? Well, if you're stuck in a completely sealed gown for however long, that means you have to limit your eating, and it means you have to limit your trips to the bathroom. And in fact, there was a reporter that asked some of the healthcare workers in China, in Wuhan, are you wearing adult diapers? And they were embarrassed and said, I'm a little embarrassed, but yes, we're wearing adult diapers. And so that pretty much infuriates me, that people suggest that, no, these people are all fools. It's 5G. There is no virus. It's a conspiracy. It's really just an insult to all these medical professionals that are risking their lives and are going to extremes of wearing adult diapers so that they can work 2.5 shifts and take care of patients. It's essentially calling them foolish. And I have a real problem with that. And so as you'll see, as this thing is spreading throughout the world, that 5G theory really starts to deconstruct itself, because you had to jump through hoops and saying, well, maybe they were exposed to 5G before they went there, because I know that place doesn't have 5G. And, it just gets really complicated. Again, I don't want to dismiss the fact of saying 5G is perfectly healthy, because it has not gone through testing. It probably has some type of agenda, hooked to that as well. But to state that it's causing rapid death and rapid pneumonia and all the things that we're seeing right now, it is just an incredible stretch. So that's just a little bit of the reason why I got so animated and why I got so upset with that. But just for the remaining couple minutes here, we'll make this about a half an hour live stream, so don't keep it too long. Let me just go ahead and check the chat and see if there's any questions that anyone has that I might be able to answer. So let's just go ahead on down here and see. So I'll just open up the line in case anyone wants to say anything. And you know what? I've been meaning to try out this. There we go. Check out that. Thank you, Kathy. 5G has nothing to do with this. Thank you. I've really been meaning to put this little comment thing so I can put your blurbs up there. Let's see. Is there any other questions? We'll wrap it up maybe in about 2 minutes here. Let's see. Not really seeing anything come through just yet. Oh, so while I wait for the comments to come in, just about preparing, because I get a little bit off track with the whole 5G discussion. So I did go to Costco, and so while you do have panic buying in Hawaii, I'm sure you do have some panic buying also in some areas of California, some of the places that have had more of the news. At least my experience in Costco in Cincinnati, everything was fully stocked. Masks, that's a whole nother issue. You really can't find masks. But in terms of food and everything else, it's still there. Like I said, people are still eating the Costco samples. Everything is life as usual. So it really is the time now to start getting prepared. My friend Tony at A Minute to Midnight, you guys should know him by now. He comes on the channel a lot, and I go on his channel. He actually has a friend that I believe he's Canadian. He's in Canada right now, but he was living on and off again in Hong Kong. And so he has some, personal experiences on what's going on in that area. Biggest takeaway that I got from him was sort of the community response to food and supplies that are limited. He essentially said that he is not a prepper, or he was never a prepper. Maybe now he is, but he was never really into the whole prepping movement. But he said people there in Hong Kong, it was like Black Friday because the markets were bare. When they would bring things in like rice or everything else, they would fight over it. There were even some people. He's a pretty big guy. There were people that were eyeing him up and down in terms of the things that he had, looking to loot him and steal the things from him. And so this isn't necessarily unexpected, but it's always interesting to hear these ground level reports. And there's also a lot of pictures and videos he took while he was there before he was able to get evacuated out to Canada. So just always interesting to see some of that ground level reporting and just get another little data point in terms of what the real story is. So let's see here. Any questions while I talked a little bit about the prepping? Let's see here. When are you going to draw the line and start wearing your mask? Boom. There we go. I like that feature. It's a funny question. I brought it up, and people in my work. So I work at an international company, which we've got people flying all around the world. We do have red zones and orange zones where people are absolutely prohibited to fly, or people need VP level approval to fly. And I'm talking about this. It's the talk of the town, really. Everyone's talking about the virus, and my coworkers, we just sort of joking like, when are you going to wear the mask? Who's going to be that guy? Who's going to be the one that starts wearing it? And secretly, I think lots of people, myself included, lots of people have a mask in their purse or in their bag, and everyone's just sort of waiting. And it's just a weird thing. Everyone's just waiting, like, when are you going to be the odd man out? I don't know. So honestly, I don't know. At least at work, I don't know. But with the numbers being falsified, I know the numbers are being falsified. I'm trying not to be fearful, but I'm also trying to say, Lord, when is the right time to really start making some moves here? Again, not the major moves in terms of pulling out of everything, but when is it going to be time to, maybe start wearing a mask and maybe start doing some things? I've already started just to do a couple things. Our kids are in swim. We've pretty much put our account on hold just because, water and humidity and all that stuff, it just doesn't sound like a really good thing to be doing right now. We also stopped eating out at this point, so no fast food, no restaurants. We're cooking everything in, bringing my lunch to work, not eating the Costco samples, making sure we're being a little bit more diligent, around the house. If you're wearing your shoes in and around your house currently, I'd recommend that you probably stop doing that. Make sure you take off your shoes. And if you're taking them off in the mudroom, maybe even take them off in the garage. Little tiny things. But I'm not yet at the point where I'm taking drastic measures, right? I'm still going to Costco. I'm still stocking up on some things. I'm recommending that you guys stock up on some things sensibly, but nothing major at this point. However, I think with how fast this thing is going, I mean, just look at South Korea. It was like a week. They had like a handful of cases, and then it exploded. And that's what the government that rolled out tons of tests. Within 2 weeks, week and a half, they were already testing upwards of 35,000, 40,000 people. Well, what happens in the U.S. with our testing scheme, I have absolutely no idea. But if South Korea is being diligent and actually diagnosing these cases, and it's real data, it shows you how fast this spreads. There's actually some animations which show the cascade of how this has spread throughout the world. And I found it really interesting that the U.S. had confirmed cases maybe like a week and some change before Iran. And we know that Iran is sort of exploding. So I don't know. That's just sort of interesting that U.S. had cases a lot longer than Iran did, but yet we're seeing proliferation in Iran, but we're being told this narrative that it's not spreading in the United States. I think personally it's spreading in the United States, and we're just not testing for it. So I'm just cognizant. I'm just aware of it, and I'm not sure when I'm going to pull the mask. So So good question. Again, this really goes back to my first video. This is the hardest part about it, and this is where faith and prayer really comes into it. Is the countermeasures are easy. It's self quarantine. It's having the supplies beforehand, so you don't need to go out into this thing. The hard thing is like when to pull triggers. When am I going to wear a mask to work? When am I going to try to ask to work from home? What am I going to do with my kids in schooling? Interestingly, the CDC even mentioned that you should be talking to your local principal or whatnot, and asking them, what the plans are from kids teleconferencing in, or doing some studies from home. It's something on everyone's mind. That's the hard part. Oh, and by the way, I definitely don't trust CDC. That is really interesting. My last video, I used CDC's own information on cdc.gov, which was self-incriminating information, right? They said that they only tested 414 or 426 people at the time of my video. And that information was self-incriminating to show what a terrible job they're doing in comparison to British Columbia or South Korea or other countries. But people rush so quickly to say that you're a shill for using CDC data. They should not be trusted at all, even when the data is self-incriminating. And so again, I think this truther movement has just become so polarized. So polarized to where you even mention CDC or NIH or anything like that, just pretty much anything scientific coming out of a published journal or anything, that can't be trusted. But yet we would rather trust some of our favorite YouTubers, which are coming out with theories like it's 5G only and there's no virus. Okay, citizen journaling is great. You do get a lot of truth out of it that the government will not tell you, but it definitely is not all truth. So you got to pair it up. You got to pair it up with what citizen journaling is telling you, and you got to pair it up with some of the sources that are coming from up on high as well. And just be, and just have discernment. But I was sort of taken aback by just how volatile the response was, just because I used CDC's numbers against them. Sort of funny. All right, here. Maybe one more question. I've gone over 30 minutes, but I'll do one more. Let's see here. I don't see any new questions other than people really questioning why are people having concerns since the mortality rates are so low. And again, it just goes back to the question of, are the numbers really real? And that's how I started this video, showing that in 1918 I think all world governments, except for Spain, which was neutral during the war, they lied about the numbers. I found, this, I'll pull it up for anyone that joined the broadcast a little bit late here. But absolutely surprising that with the Spanish flu of 1918, the Philadelphia Inquirer said that nurses were halting the epidemic, when that week alone, 4,600 people in Philadelphia had died of flu-related illnesses. And so again, these articles, you really need to check out those documentaries, because it just shows you from a scientific perspective how the virus behaved. Again, this isn't the same virus, but it's just interesting to look into these things. But more so than that, looking at the political spectrum and how world governments were all lying about the numbers and the media just piled in behind them. Personally, with our media situation, I still do think that the media is going to get behind the agenda. It's the whole Hegelian dialectic thing, that it's really not left against right. There really is a shadow government, and it's just, they're all thinking the same thing. But there does seem to be tension. I mean, there's definitely tension you're seeing between Republicans and Democrats are calling Trump out on how he's not doing this or not doing that. And obviously Trump and the Republicans are fighting back. Our best hope is keep that up, keep up that fighting, and hopefully we'll get some truth out of it. If the CDC is lying about the numbers or the Republican establishment or the Democratic establishment is lying about the numbers, maybe the other side will call them out on their lies, and we'll just be sort of casually or passively, getting some truth out of that. That's pretty much our only hope, in the rift that you have between the parties. And hopefully the rift is so great that they won't let the lies continue for so long, that their revenge consumes them enough that they'll try to get truth out, even at the expense of giving the public truth, which is not what they always want to do. But yeah, don't believe in the numbers, and I just think the situation is so volatile that next 2 weeks are going to be real interesting for the states, not just from the standpoint of the proliferation of this virus, but also from the financial standpoint. I've enjoyed watching Peak Prosperity. If you haven't looked at that YouTube channel yet, he, again, is very sensible, very calm, looking at this very pragmatically and scientifically. I do suggest you look through his videos. And if there's any other YouTubers that I find, are very well balanced on this topic, I'll maybe call those out in a future live stream. But until then, again, I am trying to recompile my notes for some ministry teachings. They will be on things like fasting, and there is some scripture that I want to look at. It's just that, unfortunately, I lost all those notes because my service provider kicked out my OneNote capability, and so I got to build this back. So that's the reason for a lot of the live streams. But hopefully it's giving you at least some good news, and keep your pulse on this situation. So it's good seeing you guys. Thanks for tuning in. And until the next live stream, I'll check you guys later. God bless. Keep the faith, everybody.